Hello! In this tutorial, we will learn how to optimize our application for mobile devices. If we press F12 using Google Chrome browser, we will open the console. And here, if we press Toggle Device Toolbar button, we may notice that when the resolution of the screen is low, the interface almost fully overlaps everything on a scene, and the application becomes too difficult to interact with. So, we need to fix it. Let's go to Puzzles, close this screen, we will not need it, and then create a new tab. Let's call it Mobile. Then let's add the puzzle Create CSS rule. This puzzle has a specific option, which is called Media Slot. Basically, Media Slot is a condition or a set of conditions, which, when they are met, override the properties of the selected class. So, for example, we can type in here the class button, which we have set for the buttons. Then we can assign other parameters to this class, for example width or height, and then we can write in the conditions, which, when met, will change the button class with regard to the new parameters. So, let's start. First of all, there is a lot of different conditions, and they are not limited to screen resolution, size or orientation, vertical or horizontal. There are other conditions, but we don't need them. We will be working with three main conditions, which are used for optimization for mobile devices. And the first condition that we need is screen. Basically, this condition asks if the device has a screen. The thing is, there are some devices without an active screen or with some special properties, for example, preview pages for the print. But for this application we don't need all these devices. We only need devices with a screen. So this condition, screen, will be our first condition. Then we need to type in and then next condition, max width. For example, let's type in 500 pixels. It is typed in brackets. So, if the maximum width will be less than 500 pixels, these parameters will go into action. Alright, let's try out how it works. Let's change a bit the width and height of our buttons for the screens which are less than 500 pixels wide. Right now each of our buttons is about 50 pixels, so let's set them to 40 pixels. Let's save. And now on such screens our buttons will be 40 by 40 pixels. Well, it works, but now we have problems with the icons, because the icons were made for 50 pixels buttons. So let's fix it. For that we will need to add a parameter background size. And here we can type in 100%. So now 100% of the icon resolution will scale and fit to the size of the button. Or we can also type in the word cover. It will do just the same. Okay, let's check. And here we go. Next, let's shrink a little bit the empty space between buttons, so they will fit a bit more dense. For that, we need to edit the parameter margin. Right now it is 5 pixels, and we will change it to 2 pixels. Let's check, and now our buttons fit more densely. Next, we need to edit the panels, which these buttons belong to. When we were creating these panels, we were not using specific styles. Instead, we assigned the style properties directly to the element. So, let's change it a little bit. Let's create a new style, grab the parameter here, and call this style left panel. And let's assign this new style to the left panel. Now we can add a new rule for this style. And before we start editing our panel, let's set another condition. So let's type and, open the brackets and type in orientation. This will be the orientation of our screen. For the buttons we only needed the screen width. So the buttons will change for the devices that have less than 500 pixels screen width, while the left panel will change its parameters only when the device's orientation is portrait. So let's type it in portrait. So now if both conditions are met, the orientation is portrait and the screen is less than 500 pixels wide, these new properties will override the old ones. Now let's set the parameters. First, we don't need margin and background size. We only need width and height. The new width will be 44 pixels, so it will be button width 40 pixels plus 2 pixels margins on both sides, and the height will be 176 pixels. Next, we need to change the parameter margin tab, because the height was changed and the alignment to the center changed as well. Let's set it to -88 pixels, so the button will be at the center. Now let's check. Let's set the portrait orientation or make the width of the screen less than the height. In this case, the condition orientation portrait will be met. Because if we leave it at something like this condition will not be met. Alright, so now our panel will automatically be centered. Also, let's move it a little bit to the left. Right now we have the border of 10 pixels from the left side of the screen. So let's change it, let's say to 5 pixels. Let's save and reload, and the buttons now move a little bit to the left, giving us more space for the main application. Next, let's do the same with the bottom panel. Let's go to Color tab and also create a new style for the bottom panel, because again we have set all the parameters directly for the element. Let's delete this part, set a class name and type in bottom panel, and here dots bottom panel. Let's organize puzzles a bit and set the style on the top. Let's save, copy the previous style and change the name to bottom panel. We will have the same conditions as for the left panel. So when we have portrait orientation and the screen width is less than 500 pixels, the change of these parameters for the bottom panel will be triggered. So let's set width to 176 pixels, height to 44 pixels, basically the same measurements as the left panel has, we just switched height and width. Also here, let's change margin top to margin left. Let's set left border to 2 pixels and margin left to auto. That is because under these conditions we don't need to center this panel. We will just move it a little bit to the left, just like that, so it will not overlap. And this will give the application even more space. Now let's do the same for both these panels, but for the horizontal orientation of the screen. Let's copy the CSS rule for the left panel here, and instead of the portrait orientation, we will set landscape. Next, let's change the orientation of the left panel from vertical to horizontal. So here will be 176 pixels and here 44 pixels. Also, let's set margin tab to auto, so it will no longer center the panel vertically. We will leave left at 5 pixels, and also we will need to type in a new parameter, top. Let's set it, well, let's say also to 5 pixels. Let's check how it looks now. Aha, now our panel stays on top, and we have even more space for the main application. Let's do the same for the bottom panel. Let's copy this setup, and here we can just copy the media parameters, thus changing the orientation to landscape. And for the bottom panel, the width will be the same, the height also the same, margin left will be auto. Let's also leave left at 5 pixels, just the same as the left panel. And also let's add the parameter top, but here we will need to type in 56 pixels. So this panel will be right underneath the left panel, which is now the top left panel. And for bottom, we will type in auto. So now this panel will not align to the bottom anymore, because if we don't change it, it will be still anchored to the bottom. Alright, let's check. And here we go, both panels are now on top. As for the right panel, well, we can also place it here underneath. So next, let's set this panel up. Let's add a new rule. Here, let's copy these parameters. We will set the rule for the portrait orientation first. And first, let's change the rule for model size. This is the rule for these strings, which are inside info panel. So first, let's change height and width for them. As for this class, the height is set to auto, we will be changing the parameter min height. As for the width, we will not be changing it directly, we will only change the font size. So depending on the font size and minimum height, these strings will also become smaller overall. Let's set it to 12 pixels and minimum height to 20 pixels. Now by default it is 30 pixels. Alright, let's check. Let's change it to portrait mode, and here we go. Now everything is smaller. But we also need to edit the element which displays the color of the model. So let's create a rule for color. And here let's set it new width and height. The new width will be 40 pixels, it was 60 before, and height will be 20, before it was 30. Alright, now everything matches perfectly. Now we need to edit the main thing, the size of the main panel. So let's do just that. The class is called info panel, and we will change its width, height, and also alignment using margin top. We are changing the height, so we will need to center it with other parameters. So the width will be 100 pixels, previously it was 160. The height will be 158 pixels, and margin top minus 77 pixels. Let's reload and check, and now the panel is much smaller. Now we need to do the same, but for the horizontal orientation. But before we do that, let's go to Model Size and delete here Orientation Portrait. Also, let's delete it for the color. This way, they will stay the same for both horizontal and vertical orientations. Now Info Panel, that we want to change. Let's set it to Landscape by copying it from here. Here we will need to change Width, Height, Margin Tab, and also let's not just make this panel smaller, but also move it to the left. To do that, first we need to anchor it to the bottom. Let's add the bottom parameter and set it to 5 pixels. Next, let's set the right alignment to Auto. We will need it to override previously set right margin. We will also need to set the tab parameter to Auto for the same reason, to override previous options. Also, let's add parameter left to align it to the left side of the screen. Let's type in 5 pixels. Alright, let's save and check. And now, if we change the screen orientation to horizontal, the panel jumps to the left. So now we have even more space for our 3D application. Alright, next let's change the rule for the Save Loads panel. Let's copy CSS rule puzzle from previous panel and assign it to Save Loads panel. First, we will set the rule for horizontal orientation. Let's also add here another parameter, bottom, which we will be changing, and also margin bottom. That is because I don't want this panel to be in alignment with Info Panel anymore. I just want it to be here on the bottom. So let's change width to Auto, so the panel will be as wide as its content. The height will be 30 pixels, a bit smaller. Let's set the bottom to 10 pixels, and we will leave margin bottom as Auto. Okay, let's check, and now the panel jumped to bottom, but now it overlaps the color panel. Let's change the size for Save Loads buttons. First, let's edit the element Save Input. This is the field when we type in the name of the saved file. And we will only change width for this element. We will be changing it with a rule for devices which width is less than 500 pixels, no matter if horizontal or vertical orientation. So let's type in 100 pixels. Let's check, and it became smaller. Next, let's change the size of the buttons. Let's type in here Save Loads buttons. And we will change margins for them between each other. Also, let's change width a little bit to 60 pixels. And here we go. Now everything fits very nicely. Let's change these rules a little bit for horizontal orientation. Let's fit our application horizontally. And less than 500 pixels wide. And now let's change it. The width will be 106 pixels, the height 100 pixels, let's leave bottom at 10 pixels, also let's leave margin bottom as is, and let's add right property. Let's set it to 5 pixels, so it will be a bit closer to the right side of the screen. And here we go, now we have our panel tightly packed on the bottom right. Next, let's change buttons size. Let's set it to 100 pixels, so they will be pretty wide. Let's apply the rule for horizontal orientation and save it. Alright, now the buttons are wide and easy to click. Actually, we can move this panel even lower. Let's set bottom to 5 pixels and height to auto. Now the panel is very close to the bottom part of the screen, thus saving even more space for the main application. Alright, next we will need to change the annotations. We will need to change their size and also change the size of these fields for measurements input, because they are too big right now. First, I will copy this whole rule. So this rule will be applied to all the screens less than 500 pixels wide, no matter the alignment. Let's type in here the spatial reserved name for the annotations. V3D annotation. All we need to change is font size, and by changing font size we will make them smaller as well. Let's set it to 12 pixels, reload, and now the icons are much smaller. Now let's add a rule for the size input element. We will also set the rule for all devices less than 500 pixels wide. Let's change its width, height, border radius, and also margins. We changed the width, so we will need to edit the margin left parameter, and also as we change the height, we will need to change margin top parameter, so they will be again centered. Let's set width to 30 pixels, previously we had 60, and height to 20 pixels. Now the margin left will be minus 15 pixels, or half of width, and margin top will be minus 10 pixels, or half of height. As for border radius, let's set it to 20 pixels, previously we had 30 pixels. Alright, let's check, and here we go, much smaller. Now we need to change the font size, because the numbers barely fit the field. Let's set font size to 12 pixels. And here we go, perfect. Alright, now let's open the annotations, and we may notice that they are too big for this screen. So let's create a rule for them. Here after V3D annotation, let's type in dialog. First, we need to change the size of the font. Let's change it to 14 pixels. Alright, already better. Also, let's change the minimum width of open annotations. Let's change it, let's say to 100 pixels. That will be enough to read some small informative text. Alright, now they fit much better. Also, let's change padding, or the space between the text and the border. Right now it has the parameters 1EM. What does it mean? Well, it means that it is exactly one size of the font size. So if I set it to 0.5 EM, it will be exactly half of the size of the font. Let's do exactly that. Alright, now the text became very dense, but when we optimize it for mobile devices, we have to use such tricks. Now everything looks great, but there is still one moment. When we start the application, the camera position is a bit too far from the cabinet. And also it's not possible to zoom it in all the way properly. So for mobile devices we need to change maximum and minimum zoom values and preferably the angle of the camera. So let's do just that. Let's go back to this tab and here we will add a specific condition. We will not be using add media because it is beyond the possibilities of this instrument, as we will be changing options of the application itself, settings of the camera. First we will need if condition, then we will need math puzzle and logic puzzle. So what we will be doing here? We will divide width of the screen by height of the screen. So for that we will need getProperty parameter, and here we will need inner height parameter to get height measurement. For the elements window, let's make the puzzle vertical. Then let's copy this whole puzzle and change inner height to inner width. And here let's set division. Let's get the number puzzle and set it to 1. And here let's set more than or equal to. So if the result of the division equals or is more than 1, the screen has vertical orientation, and if the result is less than 1, it is horizontal. Next, we will need the puzzle set field of view for the camera, and we will be changing it to 50, when by default it is set to about 35. Alright, let's set our application into vertical orientation, reload it, and now our field of view has changed. And we have much better look at the cabinet, just like we had with horizontal orientation. The only thing left is to change minimum and maximum values for camera zoom. For that, let's select orbit min distance and orbit max distance, and let's change them. The minimum I will set to 2 and maximum to 4. Let's reload, and now we can zoom in even further, and we can't zoom out too far away. And if we go back to horizontal orientation and reload the application, we will have previous settings, the default options that were set in Blender. And they work very well for horizontal screen orientation. Also, after all that, I would like to remove ambient occlusion for mobile devices, because it is pretty slow and heavy visual effect. For that we will need the if puzzle, which we will place here, and the spatial puzzle feature available from System Puzzles. Now this setup will check if the device that the application is running on is a mobile device or not, and if it is, it will do everything that we place here. And we will just place here the puzzle that will remove all post effects on a scene. Let's save and reload. And here we go. The application noticed that it is running on the mobile device and turns off all the post effects. And for any mobile device, it will be much easier to run this application. Alright, that's all. See you in the next tutorial.